guys, welcome back to another episode of the Exceptional Scrum Master Podcast. My name is Yinka and I remain your online Agile coach. In today's episode, I would like to share tips on Agile estimation. Now, one of the biggest challenges that many Scrum teams face is estimation. They find it super challenging, and that's because many times organizations and even Scrum Masters put pressure on these teams. And so because they're so pressured on not getting things right or wrong, it makes it very challenging for them to estimate. Also, sometimes it's always very complex to sometimes estimate some of this tasks due to the lack of information that they have at that point in time. And all of this makes it really overwhelming and challenging for the Scrum teams to be able to estimate. But today, I'm going to be sharing a few tips that will be able to help you and your team so that estimation could be an easy breezy for your team. Now, let's get started with the very first tip. Agile estimation is simply estimating. It's not a death sentence. So I want you to make your team understand that we're just trying to estimate, right? Nobody's going to hold you by your throat if you don't get it right. It's an estimate. It's not an absolute, right? Even in our day-to-day lives, we never get our estimates right. Sometimes we might think that's going to take us 10 minutes to do something, and in reality, it ends up taking us about 15 minutes. We don't kill ourselves, right? So why should we kill our teams literally, right? So let them understand that Agile estimation is just estimating. We're trying to understand how long a feature is going to take. And you guys need to understand that organizations would always want us to estimate because they need it for planning purposes, right? They need to be able to tell their customers when new features will be made available. And so it comes back to the team to estimate so that we can give those rough estimates to those that will need it. So first tip, like I said, Agile estimation is just an estimate. Let them understand that it's not a death sentence, it's not a trap. We're not going to hold you accountable for every number that you give because we understand fully well that that number might not be correct because we're only going to be estimating based on the information that we have at that point in time. And many times we might not have all of that information when we get to estimate, okay? So that's the first tip. Now, the second tip is to always work with your team to break down their stories into smaller pieces. Now, when you break things down into smaller chunks, you get clarity. And once you're clear about a task, it then becomes easier for you to estimate because now you know exactly everything you need to do to get that story to a finish line. So breaking down your stories is a great tip that will help your team feel more comfortable when they are estimating. Now, another tip I like to share is the fact that your team should never equate those story points to hours because they're different, okay? One story point does not equal 1 hour. 2 story point does not equal 2 hours. Those numbers that we use in story points are Fibonacci numbers, and those numbers are used for planning purposes. We use it for relatively estimating, right? We use it to be able to compare the effort required between one task to another. It has nothing to do with the amount of time that it's going to take for us to do that task. So as a Scrum Master, you've got to also understand how story point works depending on the estimation technique that you're using so that you can express to your team how to make use of those estimation techniques, okay? Also, another tip I like to share is this. Make your team understand that it's okay for story points to change. Now, during backlog refinement session or even during planning, if they estimate and maybe, for example, they estimate or use a story to be a 2, and maybe during the work, they realize that there is more effort required based on maybe more information that I found out, and I need to change the estimate for this work. That is okay. Right? Now, what you need to do as a Scrum Master is to figure out how many times this happens, right? How many times do we go into a sprint not having enough information for us to get to work? That might be the reason why oftentimes numbers are changing. But if this happens just once in a while, then that's absolutely okay because like I said earlier, it's possible that the time when we estimated the work, this was the amount of information we had. And now that we're doing the work, we have more information that informs our decision to change that story point value. And that's absolutely okay. So like I said, first tip, Agile estimate is just an estimate. It's not a death sentence. So don't hold them back the truth if they have to change that number. As long as there's a valid reason for them to do so, and as long as you understand the root cause to why those numbers are changing, and you are coaching your team to understand and improve on the way that they estimate. Okay? Now, another tip I like to share when it comes to estimation is for you to ensure that you're involving the entire team. Everyone that is doing the work should be involved in estimation. Gone are the days when somebody's out there estimating on behalf of the team, maybe like the tech lead. A tech lead cannot estimate on behalf of the team. The tech lead is not the one doing all of the work. So everyone who is going to do the work has got to estimate, because what happens during estimation is that we're able to share our perception about the work, and during conversations we'll be able to understand what is needed to do the work. And once we're able to understand, then we are able to relatively estimate that this story, this is the amount of effort it's going to take compared to that other story. And that has nothing to do with the skill sets that we have, right? So even though I'm a tech lead and I'm super experienced, and maybe it'll take me a shorter period of time to do something, as long as I can agree with my team that this task requires more effort than another task, then it makes estimation easier for all of us. Now, whoever decides to pick up that story, that is up to the team. But when it comes to estimation, we all have to come together. We all have to understand the task at hand, and we all have to estimate the work together. Now, if a product owner or a Scrum Master is also part of the development team, then that's okay for them to estimate. But if they are not doing the work, then they are excluded from estimating. So ensure as a Scrum Master that everyone on your team, from the developers to the testers to everyone, right, regardless of the team that you're working for, has got to estimate, and don't leave that responsibility to just a tech lead or a product owner or whoever it is that might want to estimate on behalf of the team. Also, another tip I like to share is this. When you estimate your stories, maybe let's say a few months ahead, ensure that when you're getting closer to the time when you want to actually pick up that task, that you take a quick look at that story and see if there's a need for re-estimation. Because like I mentioned, information changes and information emerges over time. So the information that you may have when you estimate at the first time might be quite different when you're back to pick it up. So ensure that before you actually pull in a task into a sprint for planning purposes and for implementation, you take one final look at that story, you take a look at the acceptance criteria, and you ensure that the estimate at that point in time kind of goes with the task that is required to be done. Now, something else I like to share is this. Estimation is just for planning purposes. I've seen quite a number of teams where they take the story points like, hook, line, and sinker, and they feel like that's like the ultimate. Story points are useless once you're done planning, right? We only use story points to plan. We use it for our velocity, which is also a part of planning when a feature can be done or will be done, right? Story points do not equate to value, so don't stress so much about the story points. Rather, stress so much about the value that is being delivered at the end of the increment, right? So for example, let's assume that we pick 5 story items, right? And those 5 story items equate to about 30 story points. 30 story points is meaningless to business. At the end of the day, what does those 30 story points mean? Or what is the output of the 5 stories that we worked on? That is what is really important. So as a Scrum Master, even though we have to plan, even though we have to estimate, don't overemphasize on story points where you neglect the real value of the work that is to be done. Always focus on the value at the end of the day. What are we working on? Are we able to achieve our increment for this iteration or for this sprint? That should be your focus. And once you're able to help the team focus on the right things, it becomes really easier for them to estimate, because they know that it's just an estimate. And if we don't get it right, there are no bad consequences for it, and we will just adapt, learn, and improve accordingly. All right. Now, I know that while I've shared some of these tips, some of you might still be wondering, oh, it's not as easy as it sounds. And that is why I have created a workshop that would help you deep dive and understand more about Agile estimation. So if you're a Scrum Master out there and you want to learn much more about estimation, I have a workshop where I spend 2 hours explain every concept of estimation, where we actually even go into several estimation techniques and we go into capacity planning so that you're better equipped to be able to help your team not only understand how to estimate, but you also understand the whole concept about estimating, and together you can help your team become super effective. So if you love this idea of this workshop, click on the link below and you can get right into the workshop right away. Thank you so much for spending another time with me, and I'll catch you same time next week. All right, guys, bye for now.